Episode 198, Kevin Goldsmith, Chief Technology Officer at DistroKid.
This is, I think, one of my favorite ideas for a theme of a podcast.
I'm Mark Graban. This is My Favorite Mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes. But what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. For more information, link to Kevin's website and more, look in the show notes or go to markgraban.com/mistake198. As always, thanks for listening. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graban, and our guest today is Kevin Goldsmith. He's the Chief Technology Officer of DistroKid, which is the world's largest distributor of digital music. Kevin is an experienced leader of high-profile, high-performing product research and shared technology engineering organizations. He's often invited to be a speaker on building strong engineering teams at conferences, and he often talks about learning from failure. So I watched a version of that. We'll link to it in the show notes. You can hear Kevin giving his presentations and learn more of his perspectives than we can cover today. He has a lot of experience building products using methodologies including Lean, Kanban, Scrum, and extreme programming methodologies. His website is kevingoldsmith.com. So with that, Kevin, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. It's absolutely great to be here. This is, I think, one of my favorite ideas for a theme of a podcast.
Well, thank you. A favorite idea. We'll hear about a favorite mistake, and and we'll talk about failures and mistakes. And I know you've thought and talked about this a lot. You've experienced a lot of lessons learned here. I want to ask first, though, on your website, though, just to delve for a second, you also describe yourself as a photographer and a musician. On the music side, what's your instrument or instruments?
So you can see some of them actually. If you're watching video, you can see them behind me. So the bass guitar is actually the instrument I've been playing the longest. So now about 37 years now. But I play other things as well: piano, cello, guitar.
Oh, wow. And there's some music linked on Kevin's website. So I guess Composer is the label you would accept as well?
Yes. Composer seems a bit grandiose for what it is I actually do.
Writing music?
But I do, write music, absolutely.
All right. So encourage people to check out Kevin's website, kevingoldsmith.com. So, as we normally do here, Kevin, I'm going to try to tee you up here. Looking at the different things you've done through your career, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake is, it's related to my time at Spotify. It's a product launch I worked on while I was there called Spotify Now. And the reason it's my favorite mistake is because you've almost certainly never heard of it.
I have not, and I'm sorry to say I've never been a heavy Spotify user. I know a lot of people are, so go ahead.
So even if you were a heavy Spotify user, you would not know what this thing is called. And that is because it didn't work out. So I was, this was 2015. For those of you who kind of don't remember the history of streaming, which why would you? I was working at Spotify. I've been at Spotify for a few years. Apple Music was launching, the Apple streaming platform, and we were well aware it was coming. And so we decided that we were going to have a very big product launch right before Apple Music was announced. And we wanted to do that to sort of say, like, well, it's great that Apple's getting into the space, obviously, given Apple's kind of size, and they were, I think, probably the largest retailer of music at that point. Them getting into streaming was a big deal, but we wanted to say, look, we're the true innovators here. So we had a bunch of different things that in various stages of kind of development, we decided to pull them all together to put a unified theme around them, Spotify Now. And we had a big announcement and launched it right before Apple Music launched, had a huge press event in New York with all these famous musicians and artists, and launched it. It did not go so well. To be clear.
So before delving into that, like what was
Yeah.
the difference between Spotify as it was then or as it is now and
Yeah.
Spotify now as a product?
So Spotify now took was the idea that we were going to find the right music for every moment. That was the sort of unifying idea. So no matter when you use the app, and people will use Spotify to this day, many hours in a day. It's not like some games or social media where you're on it, then you're off it, you're on it, you're off it. People use Spotify for hours and hours every day. And what we wanted to say is, oh, you're at the gym, so you're going to listen to your workout playlist, or you're in the car, you're going to listen to your commute playlist, or we're going to present things we think are going to be appropriate for you right now. So it included also some new things, a bunch of brand new things for the platform, a bunch of new innovation, and we had and so some of those things, and I'm trying to hold it back on telling you what they exactly are, because part of this failure is the learnings from this failure. Some of those things are still on that platform, are well used, and worked out. A bunch didn't.
Okay, I didn't mean to derail you. So
No, it's okay. I'm trying not to, I'm trying to build the suspense of
okay,
the story.
my
No,
mistake.
no, it's a very natural question. So, the idea was, so we had all these things in various kind of stages of getting ready. We put a unified theme around them. Normally, Spotify is a company that works very lean, or traditionally has worked very lean, definitely when I worked there, which would mean we wouldn't release anything to broad customer use until we'd release it to a small customer base and proven it. Spotify was very good about handling failure well. This is an important part. And I learned a lot from the company on how they handled mistakes. But this, given that it was a big event and we didn't want the press to know, and the press were certainly paying a lot of attention to us because the impending launch of Apple Music. There was a very scary, like we didn't want to do what our normal thing was and release it to a group because we were worried the press would find out. As we were building building all these features, and I was in charge of this effort from the engineering side. So I was running the project from the engineering side. We were seeing, as we were using it, it didn't seem like it was, as exciting as we'd hoped from the people building it. And so we were getting really nervous. So the company didn't want the press to find out about it, wanted to keep it secret, wanted to have this big event. But the engineering team said, well, this is not normally the way we do things, and we'd really like to, and it doesn't feel right to us. We'd really like to try it. We did try it. We eventually convinced the company, okay, we need to try it. So we did. We launched it to a very small cohort of users. We were very lucky. None of them turned out to be in the press, so it didn't leak. We got really amazing results, like completely completely out of the sky, kind of massively unexpected results. And this is where my mistake came in. We got completely unrealistic results from this small cohort of users, but we'd been working so hard and we were trying to get to this launch, and it was a very ambitious project. So that for us convinced us, okay, what we're doing is going to work out amazingly well. We got it. We were able to launch. We were able to launch on time. It was a huge success from a project perspective. We launched it, but of course, again, Spotify being very conscious of learning from mistakes and being smart about how it handles failure. We didn't launch to 100% of our users. We launched to a small percent to test it and validate what we'd seen be. And what we found was when we gave it to the general public, not only did it not kind of impress them, it actually made people dislike the app.
Oh.
Giving these features to people actually made them quit using Spotify instead of getting more people to use it.
Quit and cancel paying.
Quit and cancel their subscription. Yep.
Yeah.
So what our pre-release results showed us was a 6% product retention increase, which for a subscription product, that means people continue to use your product, and 6% more people using your product, especially at the scale of a Spotify, is amazing. Like that's almost that. That's what I was saying. It was just completely unrealistic. So instead of seeing a 6% increase, we saw a 1% decrease, which meant for every 100 people we gave these new amazing features to, one of them quit using the app. Which is not great.
So if I can interject with a question here,
of course.
I mean, was the sample that you had, did it turn out to be unrepresentative of the broader user base? Was that a mistake? Or was that part of it?
No, it wasn't. There was an engineering problem that resulted in that sort of 6% test increase and then a 1% real world decrease. And that problem turned out to be that we accidentally released 2 tests to the same cohort of users. One of those tests was all these new Spotify Now features. The other test turned off advertising in the free product. So the other test essentially made the free product exactly the same as the paid product, pretty much. And of course, if you take commercials away from a free product, you get a substantial increase in retention because, you don't have ads interrupting your experience.
So it was commingling the results of those 2 experiments?
It was commingling the results of those 2 experiments.
When was it discovered oops, we'd turned off ads?
It was discovered after we launched. So that's once we launched, and instead of seeing a 6% increase, we saw a 1% decrease. We had no idea what, we could have, I could have, to your point, to the group we gave it to was this group in New Zealand. We picked a random group of people in New Zealand and say, okay, maybe the folks in New Zealand aren't representative of the larger set. So 6% maybe is weird, but we would have still expected to see maybe a 2% or 3% increase. When we saw a 1% decrease, we realized something really bad had happened, but we didn't know what. Another thing that you do when you want to handle failure well is you don't do big changes, because big changes mean it's really hard to know if something goes wrong, what went wrong. There's too many things. And this is exactly what we'd done, which we normally didn't do. We would do lots of small things. But because we had a whole bunch of things, we couldn't be sure, was it something in the product that we just got wrong, and that was kind of sandbagging everything else we were doing, or was it something else? And it took us a while to figure out, to kind of walk things through and try a bunch of different experiments to realize, what, we before we found this issue.
So, to me, in problem-solving language, whether it's Toyota production system or lean and manufacturing, if there's some sort of problem, one word that gets used a lot is containment. First contain the problem before you can then figure out root cause and figure out what to do. Was part of the containment either to stop the rollout or to pull back the changes?
So we absolutely could have pulled the changes back. If we had not had a massive press event with hundreds of articles announcing all these great features, we probably would have done just that. But we did contain it. And this was, again, Spotify having learned from places like Toyota and things like that. Yeah, so when we launched this to the public, we only launched this to 1% of users in our top 4 markets. So it was, by definition, it was contained. The challenge we had was because we got such an unexpected result when it went to the public, and because the mistake was so big, because there were so many changes in one release, we couldn't grow that percentage because we were losing customers. Every person, we could not expand that percentage, but it was small enough that kind of doing a new test we wanted to do as many tests as we could. It was really hard to get to statistical significance. We wanted to run lots of tests and we just couldn't. So at a certain point, we decided to grow the container. And one of the product managers actually did the math to find out how much money the company would lose by going from maybe 1% to 5%. And we decided it was a reasonable amount to figure it out. And somewhere in there, we realized, through lots of experimentations, literally through months, took us months of different experiments to figure out what it was that in these Spotify Now features that weren't resonating with customers, and then we were able to release the rest of them. But that process was obviously incredibly painful.
It's a fascinating set of dynamics there of, being under pressure from a competitor. We've announced it publicly. There's all kinds of business dynamics that, would pull you away from the Spotify way, if you will. And it's gosh, I mean, the cost. I can see where you could extrapolate the cost of lost customers. Be very easy to calculate. The cost of embarrassment or the cost of reputation. You can't calculate that. Or
no, of course.
How do you weigh that?
The fact that the great part about having so much understanding of the dynamics of your product, we could literally figure out how much money we were losing every day, and then and make decisions based on real cost. The reputational cost, all those things, obviously that's an impact, but we couldn't roll forward. We just couldn't, because no matter what people were wondering, oh, I read this article, this new feature, when is this feature coming? I haven't seen it. That was obviously, if we couldn't give it to you, right? So we, at that point, the reputational cost was going to be what it was. We just didn't have a choice on that one, but we did have a choice on kind of how we then rolled it out. And so that's kind of how we worked with it. If I had, well, we'll talk about it, the next part in a minute, I'm sure.
Yeah. So you've got the situation. Realize, you talked about the problem solving.
Yeah.
And it's tough. Like in general, problem solving, whether it's continuous improvement in an assembly line, or I imagine with software, the ideal would be making one change at a time. So you can very methodically test cause and effect. Then, there are some situations though where the urgency might be so strong. We've had a quality catastrophe. We're producing nothing but defects. Or in healthcare, we've got some sort of high infection rates, and you might say we don't have the luxury of doing one test at a time. We'll take the risk of commingling the results with the urgency to say, we're just going to try a bunch of things. And maybe that's a mistake, but I mean, it's just, maybe it goes to show it's very situational. I mean, what are your thoughts on figuring that out?
It is very situational. I like your analogies there, right? Because healthcare is probably like, I don't want to equate what we do to testing in healthcare, right? Because the urgency is very different, right? We had an urgency imposed on by us, and then a financial kind of urgency, but we could have just kept it at 1% forever without worry. Or with worry, but not, there was no, the thing that was forcing it at this point was us just trying to get this stuff out to customers. It is a little bit closer to the assembly line. And it was this problem. We'd failed big. We didn't know how to, and we failed so big, we didn't know what we'd done wrong. And we had to then kind of reverse engineer all the decisions and test them kind of after the fact to kind of walk back and figure out what the issues were. And obviously folks had worked really, really hard to get to be able to launch on this date. And we're looking, and this was at the beginning of the summer of 2015, and then to have to lose their summer, after working really hard through the winter to get ready for this, and then to lose their summer.
And in Sweden, you can't imagine how
the summer is sacrosanct.
It's the sun. We actually have daylight.
Yeah, the summer is summer. You don't mess with summer, but we had to mess with summer, and so it was, the urgency was imposed on by us, but also because we'd worked really hard and wanted to get these things out. And that is one of the reasons why we decided to grow the cohort, just because we were locking up a lot of basically most of the product engineering organization for the company, trying to figure this out. And so we really needed to move things forward.
Yeah. So there was that known cost of learning, if you will, to move forward and figure it out. And like, as you were running experiments and trying to get feedback, was it a bad concept or was it bad execution? Like if I said, okay, it's sleep time, and then suddenly, some Swedish death metal starts playing, that would irritate you as a user. That's not a good user story. As a user, I want to hear loud rock music when I'm trying to sleep. No, I mean, like, what were some of the core things that you learned then, and were you able to fix it, or at some point, back away?
So what we were able to do through kind of trial and error and kind of different combinations of tests, there was a bunch of stuff that kind of all came out together with this. One was this is when we introduced video and in Spotify and adding video to the application. This is also when we introduced podcasts to the application. We'd introduced a lot more algorithmic playlists. We'd also introduced a lot more editorial playlists. We'd added a brand new user interface that made it very kind of, if you've used Spotify, there's a couple different paths through it. One is, I know I want to listen to Taylor Swift, and I want to listen to this song from Taylor Swift. So I'm going to go search, find this song, play this song. Another kind of usage of the app was I just want to listen. I'm reading or I'm working. Just give me something I want to listen to. And we'd done really well as a company doing that kind of, I want to listen to this song by Taylor Swift right now. Or I want to listen to something very much like this. And this was really, we built an entire new user interface around this kind of, just play me the right music for right now. Like, just just give me what I want to hear. And that did not work whatsoever. That was a lot of the problems were that interface, while we thought it worked well, while this test made it seem like it was working exceptionally well, it actually really wasn't at all. The other things we added in this were running. The Spotify running playlist works where it would adjust this music tempo to your running cadence. So we'd actually determine your running cadence and then match the music to your running cadence.
From the motion sensor in your phone? Or at that point, probably. Yeah.
And we also did another thing that we did was the kind of party mix, kind of DJ was part of this as well. All those did pretty, they did okay. But obviously, nothing like we'd been expecting. So once we'd figured that out and removed that interface, we were able to ship everything else and get a modest increase in retention, something more what I should have expected, right? So my mistake in this was I saw something just completely unrealistic. And instead of saying, that seems odd, that maybe there's something, maybe that's not right. Instead, it was like, oh, this is great. Full speed ahead. We've struck oil.
Wow. That's a great point, because one other framework that language that people use in different settings is kind of sometimes called the Deming cycle: plan, do, study, adjust. Right. So you frame an experiment, you do or test something, you study the impact. I mean, it sounds like you did those things.
Yeah.
But it's such a good reminder there is to think, well, wait a minute, do we have bad data?
Right. The data we got confirmed my bias that what we were doing, that confirmed my bias that what we were doing was really, amazing. And me as the engineering leader of the project, obviously I wanted it to succeed. And while I had concerns and doubts, this kind of gave me the permission to just put them all away. Obviously, any of my doubts were wrong. Everything's going great, and this is going to be amazing and spectacular. To come back to your analogy of healthcare or of an assembly line, you're measuring. You have tolerances, right? So if you're machining parts, or you're administering like a trial, a medication trial, and those tolerances have a lower bound, but they also have an upper bound. And when it exceeds the upper bound, that's also a cause for concern. And what I was looking for was to make sure we were beating the lower bound, and I didn't set the upper bound to say, this doesn't seem right. Instead, what I should have expected would have been maybe a 2%. An outstanding result would have been a 2% increase or a 3% increase. Seeing 6% was just silly.
Yeah. So that seems like a clear lesson learned of,
yeah,
you get results that are far outside of your hypothesis, do some digging. And have you been in a similar situation? I mean, I'm sure you're going to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Running future experiments, right?
Right. Oh yeah. So I mean, now, I haven't had this exact situation repeat itself, but certainly I've gotten much better at saying, not only, this doesn't look right, or this is concerning, we expected to do better, but also saying, okay, this seems really good. Or how confident are we? And let's make sure that, we've got the data we've gathered is correct. So I absolutely learned from that.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, if it comes back to scientific problem solving or scientific improvement, there's this process of, you have a hypothesis, you run a test, hopefully you're predicting the results. And I think you use a phrase, about being surprised. We need to be prepared to be surprised. That's I guess part of being a good scientist, of not assuming the default is, that's a different mindset of like, oh, we've got this idea, of course it's going to work.
Right.
I'm sure you weren't so hell-bent and saying, I know it's going to succeed. I couldn't admit that there's a problem, but it sounds like there was a different cognitive bias that tripped you up. That's being human.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it is, because I was the engineering leader, not necessarily the product leader. So the different ideas were not my, my ideas. So it wasn't that I was so wedded to, I am birthing my vision to the world, and so it must be right. That wasn't necessarily the case here, but it was also the case of, I'm working really hard. I'm working with folks, and I'm trying to motivate them, and I'm trying to encourage them. So when I saw something that maybe should have made me question, but reaffirmed that what we're doing was successful. Obviously, me just wanting to be a successful engineering leader, this just made me feel great, instead of me saying, oh, that's okay, something might be wrong here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of engineering lessons, and there seem to be some business lessons. I know you've been away from Spotify, but I mean, I can pose it as a rhetorical question. I don't want to ask you to speculate, or but what's the organizational learning of executives at Spotify saying, okay, well, here are the business dynamics, here are the pressures. How do we avoid putting ourselves in that situation again? Or was the launch of Apple Music kind of a once in a company lifetime event?
The one absolute credit, and I've been gone from Spotify for a number of years now, so and the company's evolved just like all companies do, but certainly my time at Spotify, I think one of the things that really impressed me about the company, having worked at lots of other places before, was that learning kind of culture. So when I joined the company, everyone kept talking about this other the biggest launch from before we did Spotify Now, which was from before I joined the company, where we had a massive press event, announced a ton of new features that we hadn't actually built yet, but claimed we were going to release soon, and then didn't for quite a long time. And everybody remembered that. So the company had learned from that mistake. And so when we did this event, the Spotify Now event, we didn't even set the press release, or we didn't even set the event date until we had extreme confidence that we would be able to launch on that date. And in fact, for better or worse, like the minute they finished the event in New York, we turned it on in Stockholm, because we'd learned from that prior. And because Spotify was exceptionally good at learning, me kind of this being the biggest project I'd worked on at Spotify to that point, I also had all the retrospectives of all the projects. We did retrospectives on any project, so I could go back and actually learn, okay, what works well here, what doesn't work well here, what should I be looking out for, which really helped me a lot. The lessons that we learned from Spotify now, so I was at the company for a while longer, absolutely taught us a lot about how we release things from then on. And an important part, I think, for the company as well is, to your point, like we could have just said, oh, this didn't work. Hopefully everybody will forget. We'll just kill all these features and just go back to business as usual. But the company didn't. The company really wanted to understand, we thought this was going to work. It didn't. Right. Let's learn from it.
Yeah.
Because some of those features I mentioned, specifically, obviously podcasts, but video as well. Some of these features, in the time since I left Spotify, some of those features are no longer in the product, but some of those features have become massive businesses for the company.
Right. Podcasts.
Specifically.
A lot of people will be listening to this through Spotify. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because Spotify persevered and wanted to learn the lessons instead of just kind of sweep them under the rug and kind of pretend it never happened.
Yeah. There was one point you mentioned retrospectives. One point you made in the webinar presentation that I saw you do was the idea of doing retrospectives on everything.
Yes.
To remove the stigma of like, oh, you're being called in, you're in trouble with retrospective. But I mean, can you think of a scenario where like even the launch of features or some project was deemed a success, but the team could still look and say, well, are there things that could have been better? What did we learn? Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I'll go back to, I've continued this practice that I learned at Spotify at other companies, but there was another good Spotify example. So one of the things that really impressed me right after I joined the company in 2013, we were able to unlock, especially back then, there were artists that just didn't want to be part of streaming. Very big artists, right? With that, the kind that people want to hear on their music platform. I don't think it was the Beatles. That was later. I think maybe it was, I forget who it was. It might have been AC/DC or Black Flag, or not Black Flag, but some other artist. I don't remember right now.
Was it Metallica because they were so anti-Napster?
Metallica was later. Metallica was while I was there. It might have been actually Led Zeppelin. I think it was Led Zeppelin. Anyway, so we did this launch for them. We did, obviously a band like that is a huge event for a company, especially back in 2013 when Spotify was a massive thing. And it went, and a lot of that work, because it happened right after I joined, a lot of that work happened kind of before I had even got there, and then I just helped finish the project in my team. But we had a big party, obviously, because it went great and everyone was really happy. And I was really surprised that a day later I got this like 4-hour meeting on my calendar. Let's go through all the mistakes of the project, because as far as anybody could tell me, it was a massive success. And it turned out we spent the time and there was a ton of things we could have done better. And it really was, nope, this was great, but this took too long, or we could have done this differently, or how would we do this next time? And through the next several years at Spotify, we would have more of these launches, Metallica, the Beatles, these kind of things. And we took the lessons from that, and it was much smoother. Each time we got much, much smoother at it, not just because we were doing it over again, kept doing it, but it was because we actually actively learned the lessons from the previous time. That made an incredible impression on me, because having been in the industry for a bunch of years at that point, 20 plus years, I was really used to, you do these meetings when something goes wrong, and it's really a blame exercise. Who screwed up? Was it the test team? Was it the engineering team? Whose fault was it? And it was really about pointing fingers, and to just have this very different approach to it was really kind of blew my mind.
Yeah. And I wanted to give a shout out to Ward Villamont, who was a guest in episode 195. So I had learned about Ward's work, and I read an article, and you were quoted in it. So and we know a lot of people in common, but that quote really struck me, so I reached out to you. And so you said figuring out how to fail effectively is a superpower in organizations versus others that haven't and are still punishing failure. It really destroys all innovation. I mean, that's so well said. That's really powerful.
Thank you.
You talked about the blame game. That would be one example of punishing, or let me ask a question this way. I mean, it might make sense to some people to say, well, if there are problems, I need to punish them. Otherwise, that's just opening the door to more problems. But it's just walk us, if somebody really believed that, is there any hope of turning them around, or do you need to put yourself in a situation where people don't believe that?
I've certainly, obviously, I've certainly worked with people who very much have that attitude, right? If people are held accountable, accountability is a word we use a lot in management, and accountability meaning not you're accountable for your success, but you're accountable for your failures and what happens, right? And I've certainly worked with a lot of people who would say, no, you must punish failure because otherwise you don't learn. I would say, my own experience, having worked in organizations, that very much live this way, what it tends to do is it makes people very risk averse, because if I'm going to be punished for failure by taking, what's the easiest way to avoid failing is to not do anything I'm not certain I'll be successful with. And the organizations I've been in that have operated in this way tend to have a significant problem with innovation, and don't understand why they're just being beaten by their competitors who are out innovating them. And it's because, anytime you make a mistake, you get beat down. So you stop doing anything that you don't know 100% you'll have success with.
Yeah.
That
happens in so many environments. And even if you're not trying to be on the frontier of innovation, that dynamic will stifle the smallest of continuous improvement efforts. People
absolutely
will keep their heads down, and the primary objective is not drawing attention, not getting in trouble. That's such a risk-averse environment.
Innovation requires taking risks, right? By definition, you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, and you can't do anything interesting perfectly the first time. Right?
Yeah.
You have to learn and grow. You would probably know. I don't remember. I think before the light bulb, like the final production version of the light bulb, they ran like 14,000 experiments.
Yeah, there's an Edison quote of all the times he failed and then I succeeded.
There's like 14,000 failures to get to the success, right? And the companies I saw, the companies I've worked at, or the companies I've talked to and met that innovate exceptionally well are companies where it's not that people aren't held accountable. You still hold people accountable, but you hold them accountable for failing well, which means I make a mistake, I learn from the mistake, I do something different. If I make a mistake and then just keep doing the same thing and I'm not learning anything, that's a case where that's an accountability problem. Or taking a risk that is completely outsized and unnecessary when I don't need to, right? So this idea of making these small experiments and learning quickly and failing in small ways versus like, I'm going to bet the whole company on this idea. Yeah. I'm going to take a big swing. And when I miss, I take the company down, right?
I mean, and there's usually checks and balances, or if it's a reasonably psychologically safe environment. You're not, nobody's doing anything alone. And you have an idea, you have a hypothesis, you want to run an experiment. Other people may speak up if they see problems or risks, and you can counter that. Probably just the biggest problem is in a culture where the CEO can never be wrong. He's fired anybody who challenges them. Then that CEO, I'm sure there's a lot of case studies, and we may be living through some of them now, where the CEO places a huge bet, and there's so many people saying, like, man, if he or she would have only listened, and they didn't. But normally there's checks and balances where I've heard leaders, in healthcare, they're afraid. Well, what if my people have bad ideas? Like,
Yeah.
well, if it's quote unquote bad idea, you talk it through with the team. You might do a small test of change. You could be wrong that it's a bad idea. It comes down to risk and reward. You're not going to be reckless,
Right.
but at the same time, you can't create an environment where people are so risk averse, or especially an environment where people are afraid to disagree with the boss. Getting a little sidetracked there.
No, but you're absolutely right. Like, there's at a point, like, yeah, I'm gonna have bad ideas, right? Everybody's gonna have bad ideas, but until I have a bad idea and try it and go, oh, you know what, this was a bad idea, but I understand why it's a bad idea now. Unless I do that, I'm never gonna have a good idea, right? Because all I'm gonna be filled with is all these bad ideas I never got to do.
Yeah, yeah. Before we wrap up here, one thing I want to explore, not to play wordsmith here too much, with Kevin Goldsmith, our guest today. In the tech community, and you're using the word failure, I sort of latch on to the word mistake.
Yes.
And there's a lot of similarity, thematically in what we're talking about. But how would you compare those words?
That's a good question. I've latched. Yeah, you're right. I really have latched. I latch on to the word failure. I think because it implies that there's a negative consequence to me, more so than mistake. But I actually, honestly, I made a mistake in that I saw an unexpected result and didn't question it. But the outcome was a failure for the company. Maybe that's how I would differentiate it. So a mistake led to a failure. I also think I latched onto that word specifically in tech because we talk about fail whales.
Yeah.
We don't
fail fast, fail often.
Fail safe, right? And I grew up meaning in my career at a time when we were actually trying to build fail-safe software. Like at one point at Microsoft, I talked to this team that was literally proving the code, mathematically proving that code was correct in a way to completely avoid any possibility of failure. And obviously that didn't, it was very challenging and very difficult. It was a research team. It was appropriate for a research team, but it never made it to production because it's nearly impossible to do. And what we've learned, like from when I was a sort of early career professional in the 90s to now, is rather than say we're going to avoid failure ever happening, instead we've become really good at saying, no, failure is going to happen all the time. And we're just going to get really, really good at when the failure happens, we've anticipated it and we've made the system's robust so that they'll fail, but it won't impact anything significant. That's the lesson. That's kind of, if you look at the software industry from like the 50s to the 2020s, that's been, I think, the big lesson that we've had.
Yeah. Well, you've shared so many lessons, with us today, Kevin, and, from what you've written and what else, is out there. I encourage people to go, check that all out. We'll put links in the show notes, and we probably do a whole, maybe someday we can, but I was going to ask you, tell us, it could be a whole, another episode. I was going to ask you briefly, tell us a little bit more about DistroKid, the business. Sure. And here's a question that maybe merits its own episode, like, coming in and maybe, trying to create a culture of learning from failure, of learning from mistakes, of handling failure well. That's not easy to answer succinctly, I'm sure.
Well, I'll actually tell you, I think, one of the things that attracted me to DistroKid beyond, since I left Spotify, I'd worked in a lot of other industries, but I missed working in music. It's clearly something that's important to me personally, and it's fun. As jobs go, it's kind of fun to work in music and build products for creative people. But one of the things that also attracted me specifically to DistroKid was that it wasn't that I needed to bring this culture to the company. It's this culture existed in the company. The CEO Philip is very much in the mindset of lean. So the executive team already, the CEO, the COO, very much in the mindset of lean and learn and doing experiments and learning. And then one of the product managers that I really loved working with at Spotify, very experienced in this as well, is the head of product. So it isn't so much I need to convince people. Other companies I've had to educate. Here it's more I can help kind of make it more efficient and make it a little bit more streamlined how we do it. But everyone at the company, which is very nice for folks like us who have to spend a lot of time convincing people that this is actually a good way of working, to go somewhere that people already know it. They just want to do it better.
Well, so I made the mistake, but thank you for correcting me. If I was assuming your opportunity was to come and create the culture, it sounds more like it's a matter of strengthening, reinforcing,
and helping, and helping build the processes to make it easier to do that, but and just to make it better. Yeah, so it's a little bit for me. The last several, since Spotify, it's been very much coming into a company, kind of talking about this, trying to build those processes, build that way of working. And now for me, it's kind of nice to go somewhere where it's like, oh no, you don't need you don't need to sell us. We're already on board. Like we just want to do it better is really exciting.
That is. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your story and your reflections and the lessons learned. And it's really, really powerful, really interesting, and a lot to take away from that. So again, we've been joined by Kevin Goldsmith, CTO at DistroKid. Kevin's website again is kevingoldsmith.com. Really enjoyed this, Kevin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Mark. I really enjoyed it too. This has been great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.